Hello, everyone. Welcome to Claimed. On this episode, I have a very special guest with me. Her name is Antia Boyd, and I'm super excited to have her here today because it is rare that I interview someone who is basically in my field. I know Antia is, I guess it's fair to say you are a dating and relationships coach, and I don't interview a lot of us. So welcome, Antia. I'm super happy to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, great. Welcome. So what we're going to start with is some icebreaker questions. I told you before this call, I used to do this a lot. And then, I don't know, I think I got tired of interviewing people per se and was focused more on releasing my own content. But recently I've been kind of reignited to connect and to invite people over to my podcast. So let's start with some icebreaker questions before I give you a chance to introduce yourself. So Anya, what is the last book that you read, and what did you think of it?
I don't even know what the last one was, but I love the 5 personality patterns. I reread
Oh,
that all the time. And this is all about the 5 developmental stages that we go through as a baby. That if any interference happens in those 5 stages, there's relevant, so to say, reflection as an adult, right? So, for example, you can't really set boundaries because you can't really be in your body, right? Like you're afraid to be in your body. You don't feel safe in your body. Another one is not getting your needs met and so on, right? So there's all the different ones, stepping into your power, actually leading versus just being the follower and so on. So yeah, so I love this book, and I tell my clients to read it. And yeah, really relevant.
cool. So these are the 5 personality patterns, your guide to understanding yourself and others and developing emotional maturity by Stephen Kessler.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Thanks for sharing. The other question I have, Antia, for you is what is the best thing about being a woman?
It just reminds me of, it's just I feel like juiciness is the first thing that comes to mind. Like having sort of that juicy activation inside of ourselves. I feel like we women have this unique way of alchemizing our emotions in such a way that's so magnetic. And being on the receiving end of that as well. You know what I mean? Receiving the man. I love being a woman, being in all the different sort of colors of the rainbow and all the different flavors and all the different fragrances, and then not knowing what emotion am I going to be in tomorrow. I don't know. You know what I mean?
What does receiving mean for you? So you said being on the other end, receiving. What does that mean for you, and how does that feel?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've been married for over 8.5 years now. And for me, is it, for example, my husband saying, I'll take the lead on our Sunday plans, okay, where we go? I don't know. So he'll find an open house, or he'll find a hiking trail, and also receiving attention, really feeling good when you receive attention, feeling safe in your body when you receive attention. Because, right, attention, it's really something that's really sort of a focused, you're being sort of honed in on to, so to say, right? And again, saying, yes, I'm safe to receive that. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today too.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing. One more question I have before I give you a chance to introduce yourself is, what are you really into these days, Antia? If I were to ask you, let aside, I know you're working with women and you have this amazing program and all of that, but what are you really on a personal side? What occupies your mind a lot? Well, I know I think you had a baby. How old is your baby? 7, 9 months?
9 months, yeah.
Yeah, so that must be probably, taking a lot of space in your mind. But I'm curious. Well,
Yeah,
you can
totally.
talk about it on a professional level, but also maybe on a personal level. What is something that's on your mind that you're really focused on and you really think a lot about today, well, these days?
Well, I think actually one is, I was just sharing that with my girlfriends on Friday, but it's actually experiencing motherhood not as a sacrifice, but rather sort of as a pleasure powerhouse, right? And what I mean by that is that as a mother, we like get to watch the pleasure that our babies, and like we just had lunch and like my baby's just like giggling and silly and all the things. And so I'm like, oh wow, where's that inside of myself? Like when have I done this the last time, right? And also like feeling like more embodied and more grounded as a mom. But it's like really bringing all of that together. And I always love to bust through myths, right? Through like common paradigms that are like, oh, you lose all them, and now your life is over, or now you know what I mean? It's like, no, how can we actually like shift that? You know, how can we find a new powerful reframe that you feel like excited, like for me to be now a mom or whatever it could be for someone else. You know what I mean? Like to get married, you know, for us, for men, it's sometimes like that whole myth about being married and being in a prison and all the things. It's like, okay, how can you reframe that? Right.
Beautiful. Wow. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I definitely can relate to the motherhood. I guess this whole myth or paradigm that, you know, as soon as you become a mother, basically your life ends, and you know, it's the sacrificial mother. Like I never was a woman who subscribed to that, and so yeah, in fact, I've grown so much and learned about myself so much more since I had children. Yeah, you go through that turbulent zone, I guess, within the first year as you become a mother, but then hopefully things settle and you grow into that version of yourself that's really fully you as the woman and the mother and all of that. All right, Antia. So now is the time that you introduce yourself to us. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Hey everyone, I'm Antia Boyd, founder and creator of the Magnetize Your Man method. And I've been doing this for like about 10 years. I've spoken on over 100 stages worldwide and really helping women to stop attracting emotionally unavailable men, right? You know, actually step into your own power, set boundaries powerfully and without any guilt. And ultimately attract the man of your dreams. Right? That's why we're really here, that you actually feel like safe to be seen with, right? Like safe to be cherished by, right? And also safe to actually be all of who you are, all of your emotions to be fully self-expressed. You know, it's. Do you want to say anything about that, Anna?
No, please
Before I
continue.
move on, okay.
I mean, I have a lot to say about that, but I want you to finish your introduction.
Okay, great, awesome. And I think like the biggest piece is actually understanding why I'm so passionate about this, right? Like why I'm here 10 years later, still talking about this, is because I actually grew up in an emotionally absent household. So I'm teaching now actually the opposite of what I experienced. You know, my mom was a narcissist. And I always said like hugs was common, and as Thanksgiving and Christmas falling on the same day. Right? Like, or saying, I love you, or anything like that. Right? It was kind of like treated as like, it's too much, right? It was welcomed with eye rolling, with annoyance. And I remember I wanted to crawl into my mom's bed when I was about 18 months old. And Anna and I, we both know what that means, how little that is. And my mom would just roll over and say, stör mich nicht, which means in German, don't bother me. And so that was my core belief that I took into my life, that then, of course, also translated into me attracting men into my life who, guess what, made me feel like, don't bother me, you know, like you're a burden, you know, like I have better things to do. You're not a priority. And on the same token, though, unfortunately, I also developed a coping mechanism, making sure I don't need anyone. Right? Like making sure I become Miss Independent, right? Get a straight A student, and so on and so forth. However, when it came to dating, didn't really work in my favor, because men were they were not looking for the high achiever woman, right? They were actually looking for a woman that they can create a polarity with. And I know, Anna, you talk a ton about that. So now you meet like the high achiever, like meeting with that fear of being vulnerable, the fear of being taken advantage of. So I was just a walking conflict, right? And guess what you attract into your life is your mirror. So I attracted walking conflicts, aka emotionally unavailable men, into my life. And what does that look like, you ask? Well, they made me all those promises only to drop me like a hot potato the next day, right? They're like, like you are wife material. And then the next day, oh, I'm afraid of commitment. Or worst case, they would even ghost. But luckily for me, I know, hello, I'm the common denominator. So I got myself out of Germany into UC Berkeley, studied personality psychology, studied attachment styles, because I don't know, it's such a German thing, right? But to understand things on an academic level, right? Like, what does that mean? Well, how can we research that? And so that's what I did. I'm like, how come that I have this relationship with my mom that doesn't work, and I have this relationship with men that doesn't work? And so how's that all connecting? And so that's when I also threw myself into other workshops, masculine, feminine dynamics, understanding men, all of those things, right? Like really understanding shadow work. I mean, you name it, I've done it. And in the process, it was really funny because I had lots of women come to me who always remembered that I went to this workshop last weekend. So they always ask, hey, what's the workshop last weekend? So I started to build like a little posse, like a little group, build some sort of support group. But again, I wasn't marketing myself or anything because I didn't have anything to show for it. As a matter of fact, I forgot to mention this little detail, but I was single my entire life. I mean, I was just going from one first date to the next. Like my longest situationship was 2.5 months. And so I get where you're at, girlfriend. Like if you feel like, oh, but Antia, you don't understand me. Trust me, I know. I know all the Saturdays and the Fridays sitting at home, right? So since I helped women, right, like in that support group to attract the right man, to walk down the aisle, to get engaged, I was invited to be the maid of honor, but it wasn't happening for me. That's when I realized, wait, look, a fish doesn't know that it's wet, something my husband always says. And what that means is you can't really account for the things you don't know. And that's when I decided to hire a leader, a coach, a mentor in my field who said, hey, you know what? I know the blind spots. And what I found out about myself was that I was afraid to be vulnerable, go figure, of a narcissistic mom. And I also had a ton of shame around setting boundaries. Because of course, coming from a narcissistic background, that makes a lot of sense. And so when I broke through that, I learned to trust myself and attracted my husband into my life that Anna already mentioned. And he told me the first night we met that I'm the girl of his story. And then, of course, he continued to ask me out and proposed marriage to me 8 months later. And so here we are.
So so sorry to interrupt. So your husband actually played also a big role in this. In fact, I know that, you both, I don't know how that story came that you started both doing this together, or he was actually in this field as well. Because if we look at your amazing YouTube channel, his videos are quite on the top there. So I'm really curious about how, both of you are obviously teaching this now to women, or maybe you're teaching this and he's behind the scenes. I'm not sure about that. Like, so what's the role that he's playing in all of this?
Yeah, so right now he's definitely more the strategist in the background, but also, of course, based on the demand, does like video content for our TikTok channel, our YouTube channel, and all those social media platforms, because he actually had his YouTube channel first when we met. I mean, he was like shooting 3 videos per day, and I always admired him for that because I'm a perfectionist. And he just like, good enough, let's upload it. I'm like, but So he had already 100,000 views on his YouTube channel by the time I just met him. I just I met him at a spiritual discussion group. So yeah, he's always been passionate about personal development, helping men to step into their power, and then learning a lot from me what the women are struggling with, and how he can help them.
What was the group that you met him? You said spiritual discussion group. What was this discussion group about?
It was called New Mind, New Reality. And it was like just after, like it was a spiritual center in Hawaii where my husband and I met. And they had like an afternoon sort of like workshop, if you will, I think once a month. And it was more like a meetup.com format where just anybody could come. And you would just have discussions about spiritual principles, right? Just like law of attraction and things like that. How come you attract that kind of person, or, and so, yeah, you would just have a discussion about your own experiences about that, or books you read, or just kind of philosophies you had. I felt it was more like a philosophy kind of workshop.
Nice. I love that story. In Hawaii on a spiritual discussion. That's how I feel like women listening to this can picture themselves meeting their men at in Hawaii at a spiritual discussion meeting for sure. Okay. So from here on, what I'm curious about, Antia, and you said this, you mentioned before we started recording that the mother and father wound is like a big subject when it comes to, and obviously, I can see like in your story, this is very prevalent that you say you grew up with a narcissistic mother. And this has been coming up actually for me and my clients. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What is the mother and father wound? And how do we as women heal that? And obviously here you can say how that, well, you already alluded to that where, you said that. I mean, I don't even know. How do you remember? Because you said 18 months, right? So that's a year and a half. That's where my second daughter is at the moment. And I know that
Yeah.
very rarely people actually have memories of that. I mean, that's like, I can't even imagine, what kind of I don't want to say trauma, but what kind of an effect, your mother basically rejecting or whatever might have had on you as a baby, as a little girl. So what I'm curious about, because you come at this from an academic perspective, psychology, and you've studied all of this, which is really interesting. So tell us a little bit more about what is that, which you alluded already, but I guess a little bit more about this link between the mother and the father wound, and how, especially growing up with narcissistic mother, and how that leads to attracting emotionally unavailable men. And obviously then I'm going to ask you, like, how do we fix that?
So totally. So there's two aspects actually when you grow up with a narcissistic parent. And I think the women that come to me understand usually just one. One is it's not safe to shine your light, right? So when I become visible, when I gain confidence, when I get accolades, let's say you win a prize, or, whatever it is, right? Like that narcissistic mom is actually going to belittle it. She could even threaten you, right? She could gaslight you and could say, oh, it's always about you. But the real intent is to bring the attention back to her, right? Like, okay, no, sorry, mom, I'm never going to talk about myself again. I'll always say, what about you? How do you feel about that? And so on, right? So there is sort of like this competition, right? Like that like narcissistic moms compete with their daughters, and I hear stories all the time. I mean, my mom would like cut my hair short, right? Like my mom would dress me in ways that are just absolutely hideous, right? That I would like never dress my daughter as. And so it was always like this kind of like, how can I kind of minimize the visibility of my daughter, right? And then the other piece is the invasion of like personal and emotional and energetic space, right? And what that means is it can, of course, go very abusively. So it can even become like physical abuse, obviously. But it can also be you're just like that because you're my daughter. If you weren't my daughter, you wouldn't have gotten that A. You know what I mean? Like you got that role in the theater because you're my daughter. So there is this link, right? Like you're like, it's like, you don't have your own individuality, but it's like highly codependent. You're almost just like an extension of your mom, so to say, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, Antia, is it the same dynamic when dealing with a narcissistic father, or is it different?
Yeah. So with a narcissistic father, it's definitely the second part is like more prominent. It's like more the invasion piece. So like, and usually the narcissistic father is also using more like sort of like the extension. So that's usually more like oh, look at my daughter. You know what I mean? Like she's doing all those things. She's like this, gets all the accolades, and she's like, you know what I mean? My be all end all. But it really depends, because it depends on, are you the golden child, right? Or are you the black sheep? So it depends on what your parent, because depending on what other siblings you have, so it gets really complex. Because if you're the black sheep, then there's nothing you can do right? That like
Mm-hmm.
that your dad or your mom would both just
Mm-hmm.
shame you and belittle you, and say like, you always embarrass the family, like keep your mouth shut, who do you think you are? But what I've seen so far from my clients is usually when it's the dad is usually more of like an invasive / abusive component to it.
Yeah. And so, how does that play? So, I'm really curious about these two, mother and father, because obviously, like these two
Mm-hmm.
figures as our parents, they play different roles, and then we take that
Mm-hmm.
into our life. And then this is
Mm-hmm.
what that this is what we see in terms of emotional unavailability with men, no setting boundaries, blah blah. So I'm curious about how does these two lines, I guess, mother wound, let's say, father wound, especially since we're talking about narcissists, how does that then
Mm-hmm.
play into what we attract as adult women in our, emotional connection to men and who we attract?
Oh, absolutely. Right. So, like, yeah, picture yourself on a date. Like, if you're afraid to be seen and you're also afraid to be invaded, well, one thing you're going to do, you're going to dim your light. So you'll make fun of yourself, you belittle yourself, right? You're just going to say, it's okay. Make fun of me, be like condescending to me, all those things. And then if
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid to have my space be invaded, well, guess what? I'll keep you at an arm's length. And this could be
Mm.
energetically that I just don't share myself emotionally, right? I'm just like kind of, oh, that was a nice date. Oh, cool. Okay. See you later. Right? There's something emotionally unavailable about me because I have this wall up.
Yeah.
Um, the other piece I forgot to mention is the other side of the coin, mother or father wound of the narcissist is please like me. Because with a narcissistic parent, you're never going to be liked the way you want to be liked. So you think if I jump through enough hoops, right, then I get the attention from mom, right? If I jump through enough hoops, then my dad stops being abusive and actually appreciates me for all of who I am versus who he wants me to be.
Okay, so you've described that, when we grow up with emotionally unavailable parents, whether it's narcissist or whatever the other dynamic is, then, well, particularly narcissists, I think you said, there's these two things that are playing. Then when we are dating and trying to attract the men of our dreams, is that we have this dynamic of afraid to be seen, and therefore you dimming yourself, or you're afraid to take up space, or your space being invaded,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore you keep
Mm-hmm.
them at arm's length, and the wall is up, right? And so there's this whole idea. The idea is also that, not the idea, but I guess the concept or the dynamic that's playing out in the background is that please like me, and this fear that you're never going to be liked, and this is what we're seeing in men. So before we continue, I'm curious, Antia, how do you describe, or what is your definition of emotional and unavailability? So, like when women say, I'm attracting emotionally unavailable men, what does that mean?
Well, to me, actually, it means it's a conflicted man. It actually means, like, on the one hand, the man wants to have the relationship or wants to have the commitment or wants to have the connection, right? Of course he does. But then there's this other part that's like debilitatingly afraid, like terrified, right? Panicked, like has such a negative association
Mm,
with closeness that it's like almost hurts them. The thought of like getting closer or the thought to share something emotional with a woman, but then stay close. So it's not about like, because women would tell you, but Anna, like he shared this like deep secret with me, or he did this big thing with, right? But then like, by what matters, what did he do afterwards? Did he feel the need to pull back, right? Did he
mm,
feel he needs to take a week break? Meaning like he can't keep the emotional and physical closeness at the same time.
mm-hmm. Got
Like one
it.
has to break. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? So that to
Yes.
me is emotionally unavailable.
So it's almost like, so I really like this idea of a conflict, because at the same time you want to be close to a man, or a man wants to be close to a woman, because we all crave, we are humans, we want connection, we want love, we want to be
Correct.
together, intimacy, all of that.
Correct. Correct.
However, there's this other side at the same time. That's why there's a conflict of him being pulled away, running away, not able to actually be intimate or hold attention, or whatever that means. And so,
Correct.
because men are our mirrors, and I also teach the same concept of men are our mirrors, then I assume, and I know you're probably, well, you agree with me, that the work then needs to be internal, because when we change internally, when we ourselves as women, as you mentioned, the common denominator, right? It's not the location that you're in. Women always complain that, oh, it's the New York City dating dynamic, right? Oh, it's the LA. Oh, I need to move locations. Or, it's the children, it's no children, it's my age, it's my skin, it's my weight, it's the dating app. So women always come up with all these external excuses, where in fact that's not true. It's you, because there's women in New York and LA that have found their man of the dreams. There's women with 4 children, my clients. There's women with no children, women who are like, it's a story that women tell themselves, right? So through the mirror principle, then we need to change ourselves internally. This is what my work is all about. This is what your work is all about. And so I'm curious, Antia, how do you work with women? And like, what does the process look like when you understand? So first there's this awareness, like, oh shit, I'm the common denominator. I need to fix my emotional unavailability. It's not the man, it's me. And a lot of the times it's actually, this realization comes to women, and I'm sure this is a lot of your clients, because there's a lot of my clients, that it comes to them after years of being in these dynamics and actually developing these, noticing these patterns with men. They're like, hang on a second, what the hell is going on, right? Because, and I totally understand, right? Like, because you and I, we're professionally doing this, but a regular woman, she's just dating. She's seeing one man, then another man. Things don't work with this one. It's a different story with another one, yada, yada. And then it's like they come to the age of 35, for example, or maybe even earlier, they realize, oh shit, the clock is ticking. I'm not getting any younger. I want a family. And this is when they start to get really serious, and then look back and say, oh my God, okay, what's happening here? I need help. And so once they realize that, okay, I'm attracting emotionally unavailable men, maybe they listen to our conversation and they're like, oh shit, yes, I am emotionally unavailable. What does that process look like of quote unquote healing or reframing or whatever? Is it going back to the mother and father wound? I know you mentioned boundaries. So how would you summarize this process, or I guess your unique methodology? Because when you talk and I look at what I'm doing, it's completely different. We're doing the same thing, but it's totally different. And I know I'll be on your podcast as well, where we talk about that. So I'm curious, what is that process for you, and how you work with clients in that reframing, or I guess totally transforming?
Right. And I mentioned also the 5 personality patterns in the beginning, right? So I would say I really work in a trifecta of shadow work, and I'll tell you what that is, right? Then the attachment styles, understanding dismissive avoidant versus anxious avoidant, anxious ambivalent, all the places. And then also understanding mother-father wound, right? The 5 developmental stages. So, and so in this particular case, what you were bringing is like really looking at, okay, so I attract emotionally unavailable men. So I said before that means the man is conflicted. So then if I say, okay, if I'm the mirror image of a conflicted man, and where am I conflicted inside of myself, right? So we're just reverse engineering. That makes sense. And so then you'd be like, of course I want to have the relationship, but on the other hand, there's this part that's afraid of it. Why? Why are you afraid to get hurt again, right? So then, of course, we can go into, well, because my mom belittled me, like I didn't get the attention from my dad, right? He was always traveling, right? I never want to feel that powerless and helpless ever again when my dad walked out and never came back. My parents got a divorce, or even death, prematurely knocked on the door, right? So that's that piece. But I think the one that you can get the fastest transformation, because I was like, what's the fast path, right? Like, I don't know about you. I don't know. Some people like to spend more time. It's actually looking like, what's my shadow, right? Meaning, where am I ghosting? So like a lot of women that come to me, they have guys sort of ghost on them, right? It's like, where am I ghosting on myself? Like, so which emotion inside of myself do I judge? Right. And so for me, it was actually like both. I don't know, for better or for worse. So I was like, I'm definitely not going to cry, because I learned from my mom, like, eye rolling, and that's annoying and that's useless, and all the things. Right. So I didn't want to be called weak, or, all of that. Right. Or drama queen. And then anger, my dad had anger issues. So I'm like, I definitely don't want to be like my dad. Right. Like, he was always like verbally abusive. And I'm like, I have more self-control, like I'm more together. So great. So now I actually have not only one, but two emotions suppressed inside of myself. Because guess what? What you judge inside of yourself, you suppress. I guarantee you there's barely that you express emotion that you judge, or you express the emotion, but you immediately backpedal. Right? So what that would look like in a relationship or in a dating dynamic is, let's say you set your boundaries, maybe you get angry, but then you immediately text your partner, oh, sorry, I didn't mean it. Like, I'm sorry, so you stepped into your power, and then you immediately told the man, don't take me too seriously. Right? Like, this just happens sporadically. I just explode. And then there's almost like a disowning of who you are, but it's part of who you are. It's part of your fire. It's part of your power. It's part of your embodiment, right? But then you're like, oh, wait, actually, let me water that down, right? And then the man is like, wait a minute, what? Like, I'm so confused, because I kind of felt like you left sort of a tattoo and an imprint inside of me, and it kind of shook me, and it kind of, did something. But then you're like, oh, just kidding. You're like, wait, what? Can I trust you? Right? So the man is like getting confused. Like, it's like, who are you? Wait, was this just an act? Like, who's what, right? Or wait, did I just make this up? Right? So let's say you're on a first date, and obviously you're not going to become a rage monster on a first date, hopefully. Maybe yelling at the waiter for bringing the wrong entree, right? Hopefully not. But the man will say, right, if you, let's say, laugh when something was actually sad, because you're like, well, obviously I can't cry right now because that would be embarrassing. And then he would think I'm like too much, it's like too heavy. And so let's say you laugh, then the man is going to say, wait a minute, I just felt this imprint inside of myself of like sadness. I felt like there was like this movement. There was a change of emotion inside of me. I don't know exactly what it was, but then you laughed. So did I just make this up? Right? Like, or can I not trust you? Or do you not like me? You're not actually showing me who you really are. So in any case, now the man is confused. And so guess what? The man who is already confused inside of himself would say, oh, perfect. That's a perfect match. Because I'm also confused. You're confused. Feels like
everybody's
home.
Confused.
You know what I mean? Like, so that's the emotionally unavailable man, right? But if you have a date with an emotionally available man, so he's a congruent, he's aligned, he's in his power, he's in his integrity, we call it, right? And then you pull this where you like laugh and something is not funny. He's like, he's going to get a little hesitant. He's going to be a little like the confused mind says no, right? He's like, Freddie, that was lovely. I'll talk to you later, right? Like there's something where he's going to like distance himself for a moment. And then, of course, we all know life gets in the way. He meets another woman who is more herself, who is more congruent, who is more aligned, gets more of his attention, right? He won't go back to this part where I don't know who this person is.
And so just to clarify, Antia,
yes,
this incongruence or confusion or conflict, it all stems from the I guess the dynamics that you learned as a little girl in your family from mother, father. And when there is that incongruency, like going back to what you said, afraid to be seen, dim your light, afraid to your space being invaded, please like me. So all of these dynamics are playing in the background. And that's why, for example, when he says something sad or that the moment requires, or it's the most appropriate emotion is to, well, not necessarily cry, let's say, but feel sadness and be in this moment of empathy and maybe even tears, or feel anger because, but because we judge these emotions based on the past dynamics that were happening, like these defense mechanisms playing, we're not able to be in that congruence and be sad when it's sad, or be angry when you're supposed to be
Correct.
angry. Instead, we judge these emotions, we suppress them, and therefore there's this conflict or confusion that creates in our bodies. And a congruent man, who all of the women want to be with, that emotionally available man who's standing strong in his masculine and is aligned, he then will obviously recognize it. And that's not going to be, he doesn't want to be with a woman like that. And then he will distance himself and say, whether, okay, thank you, it doesn't work, or we're not a match, or sometimes ghost you. But I feel like the ghosting is not really applicable to, but sometimes he just gets busy, and I don't know, who knows what he might have thought of that crazy first date when he said something sad and you were laughing at it. I mean, yeah. My husband says, not my husband, one of my husband's friend, I'm going to share this with you. I think you're going to find it funny. He said one of his friends said this phrase, which I found hilarious, might be insulting to some women, but I know if you listen to my podcast, you're okay with it. He says, don't put your dick in crazy. Which is quite, sometimes can be offensive to women. But anyways, I'm not here to be politically correct, but men have this fear of like, holy shit, crazy woman. Like, don't put your dick in crazy, because if that happens, then your life is ruined, and so on and so forth. So am I getting this right in terms of these dynamics that are happening?
Correct. Yeah. So I call it like, is she a ticking time bomb? So that's like, you're crazy. Like, is she going to freak out, explode, like be hysteric at some point? What's behind that laughter when it wasn't funny? Right? Like, what is that an indication of? Mm-hmm. I don't want to find that out. Mm-hmm. That's what the man is saying, right? Like, no, I'm not willing to take that risk. I just had a date with her, right? Like, I'm out of here. There's other women, less risk. You know what I mean?
Right. I don't need to be dealing with that. There's too much happening going on. Okay. Right. So, okay. Well, what do we do about that?
Well, so first off, it's actually developing a positive association to the emotion that you suppress, right? So if you were like, you know what? And I remember when my friend said, well, you need to own your anger. And I'm like, what anger? You had a raging dad. Like, you have anger inside of yourself. I'm like, I don't, because it's silly. You know what I mean? So I started with hitting my pillow with a cooking spoon, right? So everybody has a cooking spoon. Don't tell me you don't have any utensils in the house. And
is that what you recommend women do when they start working with you?
Yeah, because you know what? Like, I did it and I felt stupid. I felt like this is nuts, right? But what happens is your body has a cellular memory, right? So the body's saying, wait, somewhere inside of myself, I'm recognizing something. Mm-hmm. So even though it was like dormant, it's not dead. It's dormant. So by you doing that exercise of like hitting something, or maybe even like saying, screw you, or like just something like that, right? Like, even if you do it 5 times and you feel like this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever done. I remember my girlfriend walked me through it. I'm like, this is stupid. It's not going to do anything. Like, this is ridiculous. But out of the sudden, I could access anger after a couple of weeks, right? I started to become more than just frustrated, right? I started to actually use my voice. And I would say, like, what's so great about that is that's actually taking your power back, right? So that's where we go back to the mother and father wound, where I say, so imagine yourself in anger, right? So let's say your mom said, story from my client, came home from preschool, I think, and she got hit by, another kid. And then the mom's like, it was your fault. Like, you got hit because it's your fault. Typical statement of a narcissistic mother, right? And like, I'm like, I want you to use your anger and like yell in her face, push her out of your space, right? And like telling her like, no, this child hit me. Because what a narcissist does, it tries to confuse anyone, right? Like the partner, if you're dating a narcissist, the child, if it's your parent, and say, what you just experienced is not reality. Mm-hmm. I tell you what reality is. And what I tell my women is like, use that anger to claim back your reality and say, I got hit in the face, right? or you came home from work drunk, or whatever it is, right? But like just actually hold that parent accountable.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So that's how you can use the rage for, the anger for. Any questions about
positive, that? No, it's clear. So developing a positive association to the emotion you suppress. And it's really interesting as you talk about this, Antia. I actually do the same exact thing. I just don't do it in this way. I do it through embodiment, tools and techniques and coaching, things like that. But it's exactly the same thing. And it's exactly what I do with women, because what I find is that most, if not all women who choose to work with me really are disembodied, are completely numb to what's happening inside. And they're so terrified of what they're going to find out that it's easier to and more comfortable and more convenient to numb than to go and feel. And so essentially I tell all of my women that in the work that I'm doing, we're just learning how to feel. And I find it so interesting that this whole thing about dating and relationships is really comes down to this thing of learning how to feel. I just find it really fascinating, that, you'd think that this has to do with texting guides and I don't know what to say. And, I should be more feminine, whatever the women are searching for. When it really comes down and boils down to, of course, there's things we need, whatever, really comes down to learning how to feel, was a first step. And if we just learn how to do that, then automatically we reframe a lot of the patterns that we've learned in terms of what to feel, how to feel, what to feel, what not to feel. I remember my client, we're also doing this work, and she was telling me that, my mother always told me feeling is not safe. Like feelings, disregard your feelings, your feelings, don't follow them. They're not safe, blah, 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 whatever. Okay. So are there any other steps after this, or basically that's it?
Yeah. Just another example before we go into the next one, because there's basically two emotions. There's one, I call it like an inflating emotion, or you could call it like an offensive emotion, which in this case is of course anger, right? Because you're not just going to, if you're in a room and you just start screaming, or you scream someone in the face. But if somebody tells me an example, let's say, well, I'm not gonna just throw a temper tantrum like an uncontrollable toddler. Oh, that's great. That's exactly what we're gonna do now. We're gonna throw a temper tantrum, right? So exactly what they're afraid of, that's what we're gonna do.
So how do you do that? Do you tell them, do they do this with you on a coaching call? How do they do it?
Yeah, I literally have them stomp on the ground. I have a video also recorded. They can watch that ahead of time, where I was literally showing them that, full body temper tantrum with my arms, with my head, just completely, when you watch a toddler have a meltdown in a grocery store.
Is the idea to do that every time we feel anger or this inflating emotion, or how do you think about that?
Yep, exactly. So whether it's say it's at work, you go into the car. For example, I would, I would be in the car with my husband. I'd be like, can you just get out of the car for a second? And I just need to, or you can stay in the car and I leave the car. But just moving the energy through, and it's actually going fast, right? Because you take story out of it and you take any images out of it. So you're really just focusing on the emotion itself, right? So that's the offensive emotion, or you could call it, the invasive emotion, or whatever you want to call it. And then there's the other emotion, that's the collapsing, and that's the sadness, right? Where people learned, I'm the adult, right? I'm not going to collapse. I'm not going to it's not going to happen, right? I'm not going to have everything fall apart. But that's exactly what they need to learn, right? And here's the biggest reason why women don't do that is actually because they think they will never stop. That's what I hear a woman say when I say, Antia, if I start, I'll never stop crying. I'll never stop, right? And I know it feels this way, but again, you only do that if you loop in stories, if you loop in images, right? If you feed your unconscious. But if you focus simply on the sadness, I mean, when I started doing this work, I was crying, and out of the sudden an image was coming in, and I was crying like, I don't know, maybe a 1-year-old baby, right? I'm just, but consciously, like on the floor. And then my husband came in and he's like, oh, okay, you're just doing your work. Okay, got it. I mean, imagine that kind of life, you know what I mean? You're just like, okay, I just want to check on you. Okay, all good.
I don't know if my husband's going to react like that. I mean, you guys obviously are doing this coaching thing. So I guess if he sees you like screaming into the steering wheel or like crying, he's like, oh, yeah, you're just doing your work, babe. Let me know when you're finished so we can go for dinner.
Yeah. Or like he'll hold space, but he'll be like, is that everything? Come on, there's more. So he'll like encourage me to be like, there's more. Come on, I don't buy it. But that's the collapse. So that's for the woman who always had to be the adult, you know, who always has to be put together, who always has to be the leader, right? And who never could say, I actually don't know. I'm helpless. I'm powerless. I have no clue, right?
Yeah.
Like that person, because that's the woman who has like the hardest time creating polarity with a man.
That's a woman in her masculine, as I call it. Who's always, you know, doing everything, paying the bills, being in her head, leading. Totally. Like she has to have everything under control, and she can't let go of control because she feels like if she does, everything's just going to fall apart and collapse and everything. So, and a lot of the times that kind of a woman is attracting a man who would just follow her, you know, she'd tell him what to do and he'd just be okay with it, sit on the couch, you know, let her make the money, like whatever. So, yeah. Okay, cool. How many other steps we got, or how many other
so now I just want to tell you what's the consequence. So now I express my emotions, right? Now, of course, I teach my women to also let them know that it's safe. So we'll do some visualizations around it as well, right? For example, that the man like says like, I applaud this, or, you know what I mean? I love this, or so we're linking it to a positive experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's say this same woman is on a date again. First date, right? And something is sad, but what is she doing instead? She's like, oh, I feel sad. But I can stay with the sadness. There may be like tension inside of myself because I feel the sadness, right? But now I'm like, that's me. That's why I'm right now, right? Or, oh, yes, I want those hugs and kisses, right? So when I was dating, you know, I was dating this guy and he was like telling me, I hug too much, right? But because I had already worked through, that's like the other part of the trifecta, which is the anxiety, right? The neediness. And that's also what I transformed, where I said, this is a great thing, being needy. Because in that moment when he said, you hug too much, or you kiss too much, or you whatever, and a man doesn't even have to say that, a woman can just make that up in her head when she's on a date. Oh, if I say this, then he's going to think I'm too complicated. Or if I ask for dessert, then he's going to think I'm a high maintenance. Or if I, you know, fill in the blank, then he thinks this and that and the other, right? But if you can just, what I call, advocate for yourself, like you're in court, you're advocating for yourself, right? And then I just told the guy, right? Like, I'm like, as if he like just told me that I have blonde hair, right? Like I want hugs, kisses. That's it. You know what I mean? I don't know what else to say. I mean, what would you say if somebody says you have blonde hair? Thanks for stating the obvious, I guess. And then he's like, oh no, just kidding. Just kidding. I love it. I love it. And of course he pursued me and called me, left me voice messages, all the things, right? Because he was coming from incongruency, but I was coming from full integrity, like because I had those needs and I was saying that I had those needs. I was not denying it, right? But what women are afraid of is that like, oh, Antia, if I do that, the guy's going to run. But that's actually not true. Men are actually going to be more magnetized because they're like, oh, no, I love it. It came more from my own fear of intimacy that I made that statement that you hug too much. But actually, it's very healing for me. That's not what they're going to say, right? But it's very healing for me for you to actually own your emotions. And here we are, coming full circle, right? When my husband saw me go into my anger, he was always just kind of like, really getting angry, just kind of like maybe frustrated at the most, right? Maybe just annoyed even. But when he saw me do that on a regular basis, it gave him permission to ask himself, like, where is there maybe suppressed anger inside of myself? I don't know. Let's see. And then eventually he got to express his own anger as well and developed a deeper sense of self-trust inside of his own body. And on it goes, right? But you can just create the most juicy, authentic, transparent, growth-oriented relationship of your dreams, where you just keep discovering each other. Because in a way, you keep discovering yourself.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that process. And obviously, like, there's so many layers to this, but essentially that's what it is. Like, I can see how this work is reframing and rewiring whatever that wiring was before, whatever we've learned. So we're rewiring. And I love that you said that we're also giving men permission to then, because that's how it works. We're always mirroring each other, right? So when we come into congruence, then we attract, or we see men change. So it only takes, my belief is that it only takes one side, the man or the woman, to start doing the work, for the work to actually work, right? So right. I'm curious, I guess my last question, Antia, because, we've been here a little bit. My question is, Antia and I had some technical difficulties quite a bit in this interview. And I was like, oh my God, are we ever going to finish this? But we are. Because, my work is all about polarity, feminine, masculine polarity. And we actually had a discussion with you about this subject where, well, I'm not sure if I can disclose this, but I think you'll be okay with it, knowing you a little bit now, where you mentioned that, a lot of the stuff out there today about dating dynamics and advice and everything is actually not rooted in polarity. And I want to ask you about this, how, and especially because you have an academic background, how do you still see polarity playing today, especially in this current climate of, non-binary stuff and transgender, and we're all on the spectrum and all of that stuff? That's why I get a lot of kind of pushback, from women and men and whatever, who just don't understand the message, don't have enough knowledge, information. I mean, to me, it's like, this is biology and evolutionary psychology. What do you like, stop, you all are living in this fantasy of I don't know what. But anyways, I just want to hear from your perspective, how does polarity come into relationship dynamics, dating dynamics, and whether you're teaching this to women? And also maybe you can talk about the current climate of what's happening. And yeah, I just want to hear your opinion on it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so one thing I always tell my women, right, it's like, you can go and approach a man, you know what I mean? Like, go do it. And, and then of course the man that we interviewed said like, oh yeah, no, I would love it. And then, how would you feel like 24 hours later? I don't know, for some reason, I would be like, not that interested anymore. I just would lose, I don't know. So they would bring examples, right, where the woman was approaching them, and first it was great, but then they lost interest, and they didn't know why. They didn't want to lose interest, the men, right? But they just like, and my philosophy is that for a man to approach a woman, he has to like break through his evolutionary fear of rejection. Because if you got rejected and you got ostracized from your tribe and all the things, right, you're done. You're toast. Or if you got rejected by the wrong one, if you approached you know what I mean, like one of the main females that are, associated to, the leader of the tribe, and you didn't know that, right? Also off with your head, right? So the man has to kind of like almost die like a little death every single time they approach a woman, because they don't know what they got. Evolutionary speaking, it's in their cells, right? So when they do that, that means they need to have developed enough momentum / motivation to approach her. There needs to be enough of a reason, right? And the reason why I say that is because when they approach, then it actually lasts. I mean, of course, assuming that they, you know what I mean? Meaning they continue to approach the woman. My husband, he approached me, right? Like I didn't approach my husband. I didn't tell my husband that he's the man of my dreams. He told me that I'm the woman of his story. You know what I mean? And then I still had to reorganize my nervous system to believe that that's true. You know what I mean? But like, so there is this like wild part inside of us that's like this primal part that I don't think will ever go away. You know what I mean? That's like, and the same with women. They're like drawn to a certain man who can take charge, like where they naturally start relaxing, right? Like, okay, he's not the most masculine. I was just going to this dating panel like last year, and the guy's like so feminine, like a musician, really feminine, and she's like go-getter, like nurse, all the things, total badass, right? And she's like, yeah, I proposed to him, and so I think what we're getting to is just seeing, because I see the dynamic play out, I see them sometimes at church and things like that. It's just like, okay, like, do you want to have this kind of relationship? Right? Because so I want you to actually watch the couples that tell you, or like whatever, the coaches that tell you or whatever, approach the woman, approach the man. Right. And then the other piece is that I always tell my women is, sure, you can approach the man, but the problem is you're setting a dynamic. Mm-hmm. So if you're approaching a man and he loves this, then you get to continue to approach him. You get to continue to pursue him, right? And then you start to wither away, because how are you going to feel cherished? Wait, how do you feel desired? If you're like, oh, let me call Mark, so I have the plans for today and he can't wait to hear all about it. You know what I mean? Like, really? That turns you on, like to have the man like receive everything, if that's you, by all means, go for it. But I can just tell you, the women that come to me, they want a man where they feel supported, right? They want to have a man who can take charge, who can make decisions, who doesn't mind driving the extra mile, because my women have been doing this their whole life. So I always say, if you were just to receive for the rest of your life, you would be probably just about even. You know what I mean? You would just be about equally balanced, So that's like my personal opinion. And yeah, what that takes is like, I get it. You have to be let go, wanting to be right, which a lot of women don't want to do. They have to be willing to let go of control, which a lot of women don't want to do. They're sort of like the co-pilot.
They're starting to realize that they actually are willing to do that, if that means, their clock is, especially for the women where the clock is ticking and everything, they're willing to do everything. And when they actually realize that not only this is going to help them attract the men that they want to be with, but it actually feels freaking amazing to not be in control all the time and to surrender and relax and let go. It's like, oh my God, the women I work with, it's like, I haven't dated before. Where have all these men been? It feels amazing to be approached by a man, picked up by a man, all the dinner plans organized. I just show up and just be, like,
yeah, exactly.
It's just, I find it so interesting that, this is why I started this work, because I saw that the more successful women become, the less happy they are in their dynamics in relationships. And that's why my work is all about polarity, as you know. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because I know that, we connected on this point, because you're right. If you start that's why I always tell the women, the secret to long lasting success in marriage and an amazing dynamic with a man, for me personally, it's in polarity. I'm still, my husband and I married 5.5 years. I know you're a little bit longer. We've had 2 children in the process, but I'm still attracted to string, my husband, like I was 7 years ago when we met. And our sex keeps getting better. In fact, like, I don't know what happened 2 days ago. Both of us were like, next morning, we're like, what was that? And we have two kids and we run a business together. And so I know you love busting through these myths, but I always had this idea, oh shit, as soon as the kids arrive, as soon as you get married, kids arrive, it's like, forget it. Forget about sex, forget about attraction. And I'm like, yeah, no, it doesn't have to be this way. We can have the kids and we can enjoy our kids and we can also still be attracted to each other. So anyways, and I think that the secret to actually doing this right and having, being lovers in a dynamic, a lot of people say it's friendship, whatever. Yeah, it's friendship after his dick is not working and you're like totally not for it. Maybe when you're 60 or something, then it becomes friendship. But until then, you can have an amazing polarity dynamic with your man and attraction, amazing sex and everything. But it starts right from the beginning. It's really hard because, I have some women who join my program and work with me who are already in relationships, and perhaps you have clients like this. It's harder, not necessarily impossible, but harder to change the dynamic once you're in it because you're dealing with another person. But if you start all of this right from the beginning, right, with men, allowing men to approach, being open to approach. Well, I teach dating many men at a time. I don't know if you teach that. Maybe you'd ask me this on your whole podcast. Like all of these things, allowing the men to come, allowing them to compete and pursue you. So if you establish this right from the beginning, guess what? He's going to be the one proposing. He's going to be asking you if you want to be in a relationship with him. He's going to be proposing you, and he's going to be leading the whole way. So make sure you said this right from the beginning. And I love that we're aligned on that part. Anything else you want to add to that, Antia?
Yeah, and this, I think what you really touched on too indirectly is just really this transformational aspect, right? Like you have to be willing to really transform, to not just see it as sort of like a gimmick, like I'm learning those quick tips on what to say to a man. Because look, you can say the right thing with the wrong energy. And I used to do this all the time. I'm like, why is this not working? You know what I mean? Like my friend did the same thing.
Might
and she
work
was like
for
3
one
guys
day.
lined up.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Long term, no. Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay, well, because they can sense it's a gimmick. Something is off. Something feels like a script. Something feels disassociated. And again, the confused mind says no, right? So it's really like this whole internal transformation, like willing to step outside of your comfort zone and really saying, maybe there's something beyond what I have known. And I don't even know how much I could enjoy when a man takes care of everything, let's say. You know what I mean? That's like, oh, tall order, what you said, what just happened 2 days ago, right? It's something you didn't know that you didn't know. And so that's what I'm excited about, right? It's this whole transformational aspect and like stepping into all of the parts inside of yourself and encouraging a partner to step into all of the parts of himself that were hidden or suppressed or distorted. And you get to be all of who you are. And it keeps unfolding.
Yeah.
It keeps unfolding bit by bit. Yeah.
For sure. Oh, this was such a great conversation despite the technical difficulties. Antia, thanks so much for coming on board. Love the work that you're doing. Obviously, we're doing, helping women with the same result, doing it in a different way, and, each to their own, or what's that phrase? And so for everyone who, I know you have a great YouTube channel, like I look at your YouTube channel, you always talk about the things you need to do here or here. So tell women where can they find more about your work if they want to follow you?
Yeah. So like the YouTube channel, Magnetize Your Man with Antia and Brody. But also if you want to take our free quiz at mymquiz.com. And if you feel like, man, the man is pulling away, I feel like I'm doing the right thing, but I get the empty promises and there is no follow through and I don't know what to do. I don't know what's wrong. You know what I mean? Like my friends always say I'm a catch and they don't know what's wrong with the guys. Like that's going to be a really great place for you to start. Or if you have men who constantly ghost on you, disappear, and they were just about to give you the keys to their house. Right? Like if that's you, I just heard that story last week. Just the crazy stories, right? Like, so if that's you, mymquiz.com.
And so what is this quiz gonna give me? I'm just going to this right now.
Yeah. So it's going to create more clarity for you. It's for the understanding exactly like what it is for you. that you desire, maybe that you were hiding that you desire, but also what are the challenges that you have as well that are getting in the way. And definitely we're looking at the emotional association that you may not even,
right.
like we just talked about that, right? How you suppress that inside of yourself.
Yeah, got it. Well,
And
thanks
it
so much,
really gives
Antia.
you, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The last piece, just like you get some customized gifts at the end of the quiz based on what you respond.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much for coming, Antia. And thanks for your patience with all the technical stuff we had. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Anna. It's so much fun.